The lunch rush at the small-town KFC was already in full swing. Fryers hissed, trays clattered, and the smell of crispy chicken filled the air. Inside, 19-year-old Ethan Wells stood behind the counter, wearing his red uniform cap pulled low. He had been working there for 6 months, saving every dollar for community college. It was an ordinary day until the front doors swung open, and the chatter inside fell to a hush. A tall man in a dark suit surrounded by Secret Service agents stepped in. Donald Trump, the current president of the United States, had just walked into their humble KFC. The customers whispered in disbelief, pulling out their phones. The manager, Dana, nearly dropped a tray in shock. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, "you're on register. Smile. This is big." Trump walked up, giving his familiar, confident nod. "I'll have a 2-piece meal, extra crispy, mashed potatoes, and a Diet Coke." His tone was casual, like any customer. Ethan's fingers hovered over the register keys, but something inside him froze. He looked directly at Trump, his heart pounding. The restaurant was dead silent, every eye fixed on him. Then in a calm but steady voice, Ethan said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't serve you." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Dana's mouth fell open. Even Trump's security looked stunned. Trump raised an eyebrow. "You can't serve me." His voice wasn't angry, more curious than anything else. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 100 stares. "No, sir, not today. Not after." What happened? The room seemed to hold its breath. Nobody knew what he meant, but they could feel that it wasn't about politics. The silence was deafening. Customers glanced at each other, unsure if they should be recording or stepping back. Dana, the manager, was already hurrying to the counter, her hands trembling. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she hissed under her breath, forcing a tight smile for the president. "Of course, sir, Will." But Ethan didn't move. His eyes didn't leave Trump's. Trump, to his credit, didn't push. He leaned slightly forward, his voice low but clear. "What happened?" The Secret Service shifted uneasily, scanning the room. Ethan took a slow breath. "Sir, it's not about who you are. It's about someone I knew. Someone who didn't get a chance to tell their story." Trump's expression softened, curiosity replacing formality.
"Go on."
Dana tried to interject. "Mr. President, perhaps we can." But Trump held up a hand. "No, I want to hear him out." Ethan's grip tightened on the edge of the counter. "It's about my brother Caleb. He was 19 like me. He worked hard, believed in the future, and wanted to serve in the military. But something happened to him. Something that still hurts." The murmurs in the restaurant grew. People were leaning in, phones still recording, but now held lower, sensing this wasn't a scene for drama. It was personal. Trump's gaze didn't waver. "What happened to him, son?" Ethan's voice caught for a moment. "He never made it to training, and the reason has something to do with you, or at least with something you said, without realizing who was listening." The room felt colder. Dana froze. Trump's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in the way someone looks when they realize the story is far from simple. Ethan's mind drifted back to that night. It was late 2019. Caleb was sitting in their small living room, boots on, enlistment papers on the coffee table. Their mom was in the kitchen, humming as she made tea. The TV was on, playing one of Trump's speeches. Caleb had always been proud of his country. He dreamed of serving, not for glory, but because their father, a firefighter, had died saving others. Service was in their blood. But that night, something changed. On the TV, Trump was speaking about the military and how not everyone is cut out for it, especially those who can't toughen up. It was a throwaway line aimed at critics. But Caleb heard it differently. You see, Caleb had a heart condition, mild, manageable, but enough that military doctors warned he might not pass the physical. Still, he had been training hard, determined to prove himself. But that sentence, it was like a punch to his gut. He turned off the TV, silent for the rest of the night. The next morning, he told Ethan, "Maybe they don't want people like me. Maybe I'm not cut out for it." Ethan tried to tell him it was just politics, just words. But Caleb stopped going to the gym, stopped filling out his paperwork. Weeks later, He passed away unexpectedly from heart complications. Now standing in the KFC, Ethan's voice shook. He died thinking he wasn't good enough. And maybe you didn't mean it, but your words, they reached him. The restaurant was so quiet that the hum of the fryers felt loud. Trump didn't speak right away. His expression had changed, subtly, but enough for Ethan to notice. Trump took a slow breath. The Secret Service agents glanced at each other, unsure whether to step in. "What was your brother's name?" Trump asked softly. "Caleb Wells," Ethan replied. Trump nodded, as though committing the name to memory. "Son, I've spoken a lot over the years, too much sometimes. And I'll tell you something. Not all words are meant for the ears that hear them, but that doesn't make their impact any less real." Dana stood frozen behind Ethan, looking like she might faint. The customers were still silent, sensing this was no longer just a fast food encounter. It was a moment. Ethan crossed his arms. "I know you probably didn't mean to, but you did. And I just couldn't serve you like nothing happened. Not without telling you why." Trump leaned slightly on the counter, his voice quieter than anyone expected. "I've had people tell me my words inspired them, but I've also had people tell me my words hurt. I can't change the past, son. But I can listen now." Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. He had expected defensiveness, maybe even anger. Not this. "I'm sorry for your loss," Trump continued. "No parent should lose a child. No brother should lose a brother. And if my words added to his pain, then I have something to think about." The sincerity in his tone caught Ethan off guard. He didn't know if it was enough, but it was something. "Can I sit down for a minute?" Trump asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded toward an empty booth. The Secret Service moved to secure the space. Customers shuffled, whispering. It looked like this was about to become more than just an order for fried chicken. Trump slid into the booth, motioning for Ethan to join him. Dana's jaw nearly hit the floor. "Ethan, you can't just— It's okay," Trump said, cutting her off gently. "He's earned a seat." Ethan sat down cautiously, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in the restaurant. Trump leaned forward. "Tell me about Caleb, not just about what happened. Tell me who he was." Ethan hesitated, then began. He was the kind of guy who'd shovel a neighbor's driveway without being asked. He loved baseball. Couldn't cook to save his life, but he had this hope like no matter how hard things got, something better was coming. Trump listened quietly, nodding. Ethan continued. "When Dad died, Caleb stepped up. Helped Mom. Kept me in school. He wanted to serve so badly. And I think hearing that maybe he wasn't tough enough just broke something in him." Trump exhaled slowly. "I've said things without thinking how they land. I speak to a crowd, not always to the person watching alone in their living room. But that's not an excuse." The air between them was heavy but not hostile. Ethan leaned back. "I guess I just wanted you to know there are real people on the other side of those words. Real lives." Trump's eyes held his for a moment. "I understand, and maybe we can do something about it." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Trump didn't answer right away, but there was a hint of something, a plan in his expression. Trump sat quietly for a moment, his hands folded on the table. The usual confident spark in his eyes was now mixed with something softer. "Ethan," he said finally, "if your brother wanted to serve, his story shouldn't end here. There are other ways to honor him." Ethan tilted his head, skeptical. "Like what?" Trump leaned in. "I run events. Sometimes military appreciation days, sometimes speeches at bases. What if we made one of them about Caleb? Not about politics, about his story, his dedication, his heart." Ethan blinked. "You do that?" Trump nodded. "If you'll help me tell it right." Dana, who had been hovering nearby, stepped closer. "Mr. President, are you sure this is the— Trump shot her a brief smile. "Dana, sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing." Ethan thought for a moment. "It's not about fame. I don't want people to think less of him, because he didn't serve officially." Trump's voice was firm. "Service isn't only about wearing a uniform. It's about living for others. And from what you've told me, Caleb did that every day." Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't expected kindness. Not from the man on the news. Not from anyone in power. "All right," Ethan said quietly. If we do this, it has to be real. No political spin. Deal, Trump said. The friars hissed in the background as the weight of the moment sank in. Something bigger than fried chicken orders was unfolding in that small-town KFC. That night, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand. His mom, Linda, answered on the second ring. "Hey, honey. Long day?" she asked, her voice tired but warm. "Yeah, and something weird happened," Ethan said. "Trump came to KFC today." There was a pause. "You're joking."
"No, Mom."
"He ordered food for me, and I told him I couldn't serve him."
"What?"
"Ethan, wait," he interrupted. "I told him why. I told him about Caleb, about that night with the speech. And he listened. He didn't get mad. He wants to honor Caleb, hold some kind of event." Silence on the other end. Then a shaky inhale. He wants to do that." "Yeah, but only if we agree. No politics, just Caleb's story." His mom's voice softened, but it trembled. "Ethan, your brother loved this country. If his story can help someone else, someone who feels like they're not enough, then maybe it's worth it." Ethan stared at the framed photo of Caleb on his desk. "Yeah, maybe it is." They talked a little longer, but when Ethan hung up, he felt the first hint of something he hadn't in months.
Peace.
The next morning, Ethan's phone exploded with notifications. Videos of the KFC encounter had gone viral overnight. Headlines read, "KFC worker refuses to serve Trump. The reason will break your heart." Journalists camped outside the restaurant. Strangers sent messages, some kind, others cruel. Dana was stressed, but kept telling reporters, no comment. Trump's office released a short statement. The president had a meaningful conversation with a young man about his late brother. Plans are underway to honor his memory. Ethan tried to keep his head down, but customers recognized him. Some shook his hand, others whispered judgment. By lunchtime, Trump himself called the store. Dana handed the phone to Ethan, mouthing, "Don't quit, Ethan." Trump's voice came through the line. "We're doing this. I've booked a community hall near your town 2 weeks from now.
Your mom should speak.
And you too. We'll invite veterans, recruits, and young people thinking about service." Ethan hesitated. 2 weeks. "That's plenty of time to make it perfect," Trump said. "And I'll cover all expenses." When Ethan hung up, Dana asked, "You okay with this?" He nodded slowly. "I think so. I just want to make sure it's really about Caleb, not about me, not about politics." Dana smiled faintly. "From what I've seen, you'll make sure of that." Over the next few days, Ethan and his mom gathered photos, letters, and memories. The living room turned into a small shrine. Baseball gloves, school awards, his favorite worn-out hoodie. Linda sat with a stack of letters Caleb had written to friends. "He had this way of making people believe in themselves," she said softly. "Even when he didn't always believe in himself." Ethan nodded. "That's what I want people to remember." They chose a few personal stories for the speech, like the time Caleb spent an entire weekend fixing an elderly neighbor's fence, refusing payment, or how he once gave his last $10 to a classmate for lunch. One evening, Ethan found Caleb's notebook. Inside was a list titled, "Things I'll Do After Basic Training." The first line read, "Tell Ethan I'm proud of him." His throat tightened. He closed the notebook gently, like it was fragile glass. The speech was starting to take shape, but so was Ethan's realization that this event wasn't just for Caleb. It was for every person who had ever doubted their worth because of a few careless words. 2 weeks later, the community hall was packed. Veterans in uniform, young recruits, families, all gathered under banners that read, "Service is more than a uniform." Ethan stood backstage with his mom. Trump arrived shaking hands with attendees, surprisingly subdued. No campaign slogans, no speeches about policy, just quiet greetings and nods. When it was time, Trump introduced the Wells family. "Today isn't about me," he said into the microphone. "It's about Caleb Wells, a young man who lived with courage. Even if his service wasn't in the military, his life still teaches us something important." Ethan stepped up to the podium. The crowd was silent, waiting. He glanced at his mom, who gave him a small nod. "Caleb was my big brother," Ethan began. He taught me that strength isn't about how many push-ups you can do. It's about how much you can lift someone else when they're down. He told Caleb stories. The fence, the lunch money, the quiet sacrifices. He didn't mention politics once. By the end, half the room had tears in their eyes, including Trump. As the applause faded, Trump stood again. "Ethan, I'd like to make an announcement," he said, motioning for Ethan to stay beside him. He turned to the crowd. "We are creating a scholarship in Caleb's name, the Caleb Wells Service Award. It will go to young people who dedicate themselves to serving others in any way they can. No uniforms required, just heart." The room erupted in applause. Linda covered her mouth, tears streaming. Ethan stared at Trump, stunned. "I want this to be a reminder," Trump continued, "that every act of service matters and that words, mine included, can either build someone up or break them down. Let's choose the first." It was the twist nobody had expected. Not just an event, but something lasting, something that could help hundreds, maybe thousands of young people like Caleb. Ethan swallowed hard. "Thank you," he said quietly. Trump shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for having the courage to speak up." The story hit national news. For once, the headlines weren't about division. They were about unity, compassion, and a scholarship born from a KFC encounter. Applications for the award flooded in within days. Kids from small towns, big cities, and everywhere in between wrote about their own ways of serving, tutoring neighbors, caring for sick relatives, volunteering at shelters. Ethan went back to work at KFC, but things were different. Customers came not just for chicken. They came to tell him their stories. Some shared how they'd once doubted themselves, but now felt inspired. One evening, a teenage boy came in shyly, handing Ethan a letter. "I'm applying for the scholarship," he said. "I didn't think I mattered much until I heard about your brother." Ethan smiled, slipping the letter into his pocket. "You matter," he said simply. Months later, the first scholarship ceremony took place. Linda presented the award to a young woman who had started a free meal program in her community. Ethan watched from the audience, feeling a strange mix of sadness and pride. Caleb wasn't there, but in a way, he was everywhere. After the ceremony, Trump found Ethan. "You kept your promise," he said. Ethan nodded. "So did you." They stood there for a moment. No cameras, no crowd. Just two people who had both learned something. Ethan realized that sometimes the most important moments happen far away from the spotlight, in small-town restaurants, in late-night conversations, in the quiet decision to speak up when it matters. The scholarship gained attention beyond the U.S. Other countries picked up the story. Schools used Caleb's life as a case study in kindness. One teacher emailed Ethan, "Your brother's story changed the way my students think about service. Some of them are starting projects in his name." Ethan replied simply, "That's all we ever wanted." He kept Caleb's notebook on his desk, the page with "Tell Ethan I'm proud of him" bookmarked. Some days he'd open it just to remind himself that in a way that promise had been fulfilled. Ethan started volunteering at a local youth center. At first, it was just a few hours a week helping kids with homework, but soon it became a passion. One night, a boy asked, "Why do you do this?" Ethan smiled. "Because someone I loved once taught me that helping even one person can change a life." And he was right. The boy grinned. "Sounds like he was a good guy." "The best," Ethan said softly. One day, Linda found an envelope tucked inside an old book. It was addressed to Ethan in Caleb's handwriting. Inside was a short letter. "If you're reading this, I want you to know I'm proud of you. No matter what you do, you've already made me proud." Ethan read it 3 times, tears falling onto the paper. That night, he placed the letter next to the scholarship plaque in their home. A year later, Trump stopped by the same KFC while passing through town. This time, Ethan served him the meal himself. When he handed over the tray, Trump said, "No refusal today." Ethan grinned. "Not today, but I'll still tell you if you mess up." Trump chuckled. "Fair deal." The scholarship had already supported dozens of projects: community gardens, literacy programs, animal rescues. Each recipient carried Caleb's name into their work. Ethan realized that his refusal that day had been the start of something far bigger than he'd imagined. On the second anniversary of Caleb's passing, Ethan visited his grave. He placed the scholarship's annual report beside the headstone. "Look, Caleb," he said quietly. "You helped a lot of people this year. Guess you're serving after all." Ethan often thought about how one small act, speaking up to a customer, had changed his life. The moral was simple. Words matter, and so does the courage to tell someone when theirs have hurt you. In the end, it wasn't about politics. It was about people, about choosing to turn hurt into hope and silence into something worth hearing. And somewhere in the quiet of a small-town KFC, that truth still lingers, just like the memory of a young man named Caleb Wells.